To the left-hand side for Vieira, who'll play it through to Gabriel Jesus, who's in here for Arsenal. Gabriel Jesus to finish it off. Oh, what a way to do it! Gabriel Jesus seals the points for Arsenal. He's back, and he's back with a bang. Into the penalty area it goes. Gabriel's header, and it's into the back of the net. Arsenal take an early lead through Gabriel.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the daily Arsenal podcast with me, Harry Symeou.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to another live episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou, and I'm delighted to say we've got the A-team out on a bank holiday special. First of all, Tom Canton, the head honcho of the Gooner Talk TV and Football.London's very own. Tom, how's it going?
It's going good, man. It's good to see you at the weekend. Enjoy a beautiful cooked breakfast and a couple of waffles as well. It's gorgeous.
Oh, the waffles. I didn't even know they were there, and Tom pointed them out to me, and it was the best part of my day, I got to say. Also joining us, football's 12th man, legend, host, boss, Dan Potts is with us. Dan, good to see you on TNT Sports over the weekend, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, big up, man. Thanks for having me, mate. I was just saying off air that it's been ages since I've shared a platform with the three of you as one. I've spent some time individually with you over the last couple of years, but my word, it's good to see you three, man, together. So big up, and yeah, cheers for that. Listen, I've got to thank Tom for that. Tom sorted that out, so big up to him, man. I appreciate it, and thank you for that.
And my fellow Greek, who's probably like me, decided she's going to go vegan now for the next 6 months after the amount of meat consumed yesterday for Orthodox Easter. Sophie Nicolaou of the Highbury squad, how are you?
I am stuffed, and yes, I'm going meatless for a little bit. And now I've got the theme of the A tune in my brain. Yeah, it was a heavy food day, man. Oof, why do we do it to ourselves?
I don't know. I've been to a restaurant today and I had a non-meat meal, which for me to go to a restaurant and not have a meal with meat in it is wild, but I'm just sick of it. I just don't think I can take it for a little while. What I'm not sick of, though, is this Arsenal team who are performing brilliantly at the moment. I do want to get into a bit of a discussion about the title race. I want to get you guys' thoughts on where we're at with it, how you're feeling about it. I look at Arsenal now, Tom, and I don't see a team that is struggling with the pressure. I don't see what I saw last season. Last season, we saw a team that obviously had its injury problems, but you felt like kind of went into its shell when it really, really mattered. Whereas this time, regardless of what happens, you can quite confidently say, can't you, that Arsenal are performing right now and are playing their normal game, regardless of what's going on around them and what could potentially be at stake.
Yeah, I mean, they've taken 46 points from a possible 51 in 2024, which is, an incredible return. Is it frustrating that we drop points against Villa? Absolutely. Could it be the game that ends up costing us a title? Potentially. But I don't look at that and think, oh, Arsenal bottled it because they didn't beat Villa, because I look at that points tally from the entirety of 2024 and there isn't another team that amassed more points than us. Man City have got one less during that period of time, and that is the reality of a Premier League title race in 2024. Is you basically have to win every game, which is an astonishing requirement. But it is the reality at the moment. And when you look at the two teams, kind of City and Arsenal, who you'd bank on being able to do that, the answer to everybody should be fairly obvious. Yeah, Arsenal have been punching above their weight to a degree still and are continuing to push forwards and play, as you say, great football, dominant against a Bournemouth side that if the season started at the 1st of November, that Bournemouth side would be 5th right now. That's how good that they've been. And I don't think I've seen a more dominant first half performance. So we really limited them to very, very little. Gabriel's slip, obviously letting in Solanke, but Saliba with a brilliant tackle. I thought for me, Saliba was probably man of the match as well in the game. I thought it was really harshly done. I know that Rice scored and that probably got him the award, but I thought Saliba was stunningly good for a side that mainly dominated the game, especially in the first half. And yeah, we're just playing some excellent stuff and we've got momentum and confidence. And as you say, this time last season, we didn't have that. We were finding ourselves uprooted and stumbling and losing key players. And it is a very different end to this campaign, which is I'm very grateful for that.
Dan, where are you at? Because I know that you've said in the past that, kind of what's the point in a project if it doesn't amount to trophies and stuff. And I
Look
look
at
at
the
this.
smile on Sophie's face.
No, I've got to ask this because I think for me, I've kind of people are going to call me a loser for saying this, and people are going to say, "Oh, you've got a loser mentality," and all that normal stuff that gets thrown at me. But going back to what Tom was saying, the amount of points that Arsenal have amalgamated in this second half of the season, the fact that they have continued to push regardless of the pressures that come with being in a title race, and look as though if they don't take it to the final weekend, it's at least going to go to the weekend before. Doesn't that, is that, I guess the question is, Dan, is that enough for you? Is that enough for you with this team? Because yes, everybody wants to be celebrating a trophy and turning up to a parade later on this month. But just looking at the way that Arsenal have competed, the fact that they've closed the gap, in my opinion, even more, and they've done that this season whilst having Champions League football, is that enough for you, or is it trophy, or it's just not acceptable?
Well, listen, I want to win stuff, Harry, of course, and trophies for me are what the sport's all about. I can't deny the fact that the last 2 years he's got us challenging, and Mikel Arteta deserves a lot of credit for that. I think the first few years I was just getting frustrated with what I was seeing. I didn't think we were particularly playing very well. I thought Mikel Arteta was struggling because he was new to the job, and I think tactically he was poor at times. And there's definitely been mistakes this season and last season where Mikel's got it wrong for sure. I think against Aston Villa a few weeks ago, it was quite clear that he got that wrong by changing Havertz back into midfield, etc. So you can definitely look to point to fingers to what he's done wrong. But I think you can do that with every manager this season, to be fair, at times. I think you also got to look at what you're up against. Manchester City are pretty much faultless, and we've lost one game the whole of this year, and it still probably isn't going to be enough to win the league, which just shows what you're up against. Having said that, I'm not one of the guys to sit there and say, well, that's it. What could we do? It's the best. Second is all we can get now. We move on, and hopefully we get second next year. It's for me about how we try and prove so that we can get ahead of them. And I think we've got to get across the line, man. It's been four years now that we've been trying to get to their level. I think we're now at their level. I think we've proven now that we can go up against them and actually give them a game. And even up to last year, we were getting embarrassed by them. If you remember, we lost 3-0 at home and 4-1 away. So it wasn't like we were getting anywhere near really when we were coming head to head with them. This year, we've beaten them in the Community Shield. I know people will say it's only a charity game or whatever it be, but we did beat them. We didn't lose them the Etihad, and we did beat them at home. So now we're actually going up against these teams that we're fighting up against and giving them a good game. So I can see huge progress in that. The team this year have definitely been more solid defensively, and there's no doubt in my mind that is down to the coaching and definitely the players that we brought in, particularly Declan Rice. With a Golden Glove goalkeeper, the best defensive record. You've mentioned Tom and the centre-back partnership, which I totally agree with, and I think that epitomised how good they've both been. When Gabriel makes a mistake, Saliba's there to have his back. So them three, definitely with Rice involved, definitely are the reason as to why we're here. So the process, the project, all that's kind of done now anyway. We're here now. It's like, do we think that worked? Well, he had 5 years without winning anything really other than the FA Cup that we picked up when he first selected a side that was, not good enough. So we haven't won anything with this team. I think this team deserves to win something. I'll say that. And I think it's incredibly harsh if it doesn't win something this year. I'd have liked us to have taken the domestic cups a little bit more seriously, if I'm honest. But I'm happy at the moment with where we are. I'm a winner, man, and I've got to win. I've got to win these trophies, man, because I can see progress, but I've got to be lifting something, man.
Sophie, where are you at on that question? Because I think it's a really interesting question because, as I say, I sit there and I look at this team and I think, brilliant. I'm enjoying the ride. I'm enjoying every bit of it. But then there is that bit of deflation that seems to follow me around anyway, every time Manchester City then go on and win their game. So I'm wondering how I'm going to feel at the end of the season. Will I be able to say, you know what, we were unlucky, we were brilliant, particularly in that second part, and it just wasn't our year? Or do you think you're going to see it through a slightly different lens? Where are you at on that?
I love this question because it's so polarizing, with Arsenal fans. And maybe if this was a couple of seasons ago, I would have felt a little bit differently about it. You're right about the hype. After the Bournemouth game, I'm like, oh my God, this is it. I've always believed that we can win the league because I see the players believe it. I don't think they believed it last season, but I think this season they truly have a belief about them. And then the Man City game kind of happens, and you're like, everyone's just laying their swords down. It just feels like anticlimactic then. And then you think, well, you know what? I've accepted now, not because I don't believe that we can still win it, of course, but I've accepted that we probably won't. And so when you reconcile that, you can actually start looking at the season for the joyous journey that it's been. You know, I've tried to look at this season very much as part of a journey and not a destination. And you guys have spouted all the data and the analytics. You know, we're up against a beast. We're up against one of the greatest managers of all time. You know, I know Dan talks about how it's like 4 or 5 seasons, but when you look at Mikel Arteta going up against Pep Guardiola, going up against Jurgen Klopp, 2 managers that continually get lauded in the media, right? And we've been so close twice with the youngest team last season. And then you listen to David Moyes' press conference yesterday. Why have West Ham failed? Declan Rice, simple answer. So success requires layers. And I like to use American sports as an analogy because it took Michael Jordan 8 seasons to actually win a championship. Now, I'm not saying we should wait 8 seasons. Even if you look at Stan Kroenke's LA Rams, he had patience with Sean McVay, the manager, the coach. You know, they went to a championship game. They went to a Super Bowl. They lost, kept faith with him, delivered the big one. You know, they've done the same thing with the Denver Nuggets. They've done the same thing with a lot of their sports teams here. And sometimes fans don't like to hear the analogy with US sports, but the owners are, and they've kept faith. And you can see season after season something building. Arsenal fans who deny what's happening, I don't get that. I was definitely an Arteta. I didn't have faith in him. In the first season and a half, I just couldn't see it. And, you know, Kevin always used to say to me, it's the players. And I always believe like a team that's successful becomes an image of their manager. You've seen it with Pep, you've seen it with Klopp, you've seen it with Ancelotti, you've seen it with Conte. And those guys also have massive experience and have been in the big moments. So for me, the fact that they've kept faith, they've invested, and then some fans will be like, yeah, but we've spent so much money. Well, yeah, it takes a lot of money to invest to win in sports, and it doesn't happen overnight. We live in an instant gratification world, and it's just not how it is, right? So for me, when you see the steps, how can you deny that he hasn't improved the club? How can you deny that he hasn't improved the team? How can you deny that after mentally collapsing in the Champions League season where Tottenham qualified and we didn't, you come back and you challenge for the title, an improbable run? Mentally, that's growth. You lose out on that. People weren't expecting us to do it again this season, but here we are. Once again, one of the biggest areas I think we've improved in is mental, as well as having the talent on the pitch. So for me, I think that this is just the beginning. And there are a lot of fans that might think it's the end. But I think the owners have shown faith in Adu and Mikel. They've taken the responsibility and handled it brilliantly. And if we can continue to strengthen the squad and upgrade, I think we'll be just fine and we'll be challenging again next season. So for me, yeah, it's good enough.
Tom, will we win the championship this year? Like, not what do you want to happen, not what are you hoping is going to happen. Like,
I don't know.
because I'm asking for your prediction, basically, because I sit there and no matter how positive I try and be, and no matter how much I try and like look at the bright side, the kind of glass half full, and you guys will know that I've been like that pretty much all the way, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 wobbles at the beginning with Mikel Arteta. But even now I'm looking at this and I'm going, where on earth do Manchester City drop points? And the other thing is, I don't even sit here with confidence, and maybe I should, but I don't sit here thinking we're going to go to Old Trafford and we're going to blow Manchester United out of the water either. So I can't see it happening. I hate to say it, but I can't see it happening.
Yeah, and that's fine. Like, on paper, it's not going to, because Arsenal should win their 2 games, but Man City should also win their 3 games. So that's why I have absolutely zero expectations in terms of a title win in these as we go to the end. If we win the title, it would be the most beautiful shock. Besides, I don't know, the missus getting pregnant or something. Because if she hears this, she'll want me to say that's a bigger, more excitable surprise.
You've just dug yourself a hole there, Tom.
I did. You know, I've been here before. But I think when it comes to like the reality is, we'll look back on the season, and last season I said that the reason we didn't win the league was outside of the injuries suffered. It was because, as Dan pointed out, we lost 7-1 on aggregate in the 2 games against City. This season, we've beaten City and we've drawn at their place. We've beaten Liverpool and drawn at their place. You'd look at that and go, well, the team that's done that should win the league. So then you look at the games where we drop points, and then you think about why we've dropped points in certain games this season. Yeah, we've been a bit unfortunate. The Newcastle and West Ham games, I'll forever look at how thick a goal line is of the ball going out of play. Will always come back to haunt this season potentially. I think about the refereeing calls in the Villa game away from home, and I forget about I will rue our missed chances in the home game against Villa in the first half. We should have been clear at half time in that game at the Emirates, and we weren't. That Trossard chance from like 2 yards out, how he's not scored, it will again haunt this season if we don't win it. So yeah, in my mind, I don't think we will. And I will look at this season as a huge step forwards again, and a couple of rungs closer to where I want to be, which is winning the league. I think that when we look at the future of Arsenal, I go, well, Arteta's earned that new deal, but that new deal, be it 2-3 year extension, that new deal has to come with the deliverance of a Premier League or a Champions League title. It's not like this deal, which was always about getting Arsenal challenging into the top. To earn the next one after this one that's going to come, he needs to deliver the big trophy, because otherwise there is a very strong argument that this is as far as he can take us, and then you need to look at what comes next. But we can cross that bridge if and when it comes.
Yeah, I feel like we maybe as fans have gotten ahead of ourselves a little bit, in that if you rewind back 5 years, we'd have all been saying, what's the next step? And the next step was, we need to get ourselves back in the Champions League. And not only do we need to do it for a one-off season, we need to do it consistently. We need to be back in that place where we're bringing in those revenues, where we've got that status, where we're competing with Europe's elite season after season after season. Arsenal were a permanent fixture in the Champions League under Arsene Wenger for the most part of his Arsenal career, and we needed to get back to that. What we've managed to do, though, is qualify for it last year, obviously, for the first time in a while. And this year, we've managed to do that thing, which is building on the foundation that we laid last year, making sure that we're back in the Champions League for the upcoming season. And if you can start doing that consistently, you're laying those foundations and you're making them stronger financially and in terms of your status, so that you can go on and be a contender for the Premier League title. And I almost feel like, because we've done that in the sort of means of accelerating our title challenge as well, we're now looking at it and going, we should be winning the title. And I don't think that we have any divine right, really, to beat this Manchester City side to the Premier League title, when you consider that Jurgen Klopp, who, if you rewind back 2 years, every Arsenal fan that was anti-Arteta was telling me, is head and shoulders above him. And, if only we had him. He's only won it once, and he won it in the COVID season, which is not a slate on Jurgen Klopp. It just highlights how difficult it is to do what we're now expecting this team and demanding this team to do, having come from a place where we're not even a Champions League club. So that's where Dan, do you think that I know you're going to disagree, which is why I'm coming to you first, but it feels like we're getting ahead of ourselves in terms of where this team is actually at, because we had a really good season last year. We've had a good one now, and now the demand is there and the expectation is there, but actually that next step of getting over the line in the Premier League title race is a lot bigger step to take than I think people would have you believe.
It's a difficult step to take, mate, but it was difficult back in 2002, 2004, 2001, and we were coming up against an unbelievable Premier League manager in Sir Alex Ferguson. So I never once left Highbury after 99 and thought, that's us done then for a few years. We're going to have to do a process again, another 5 years needed. They've just won a treble, ain't going to win it this year. We went and won it. In 2002, we did double. 2004, we went invincible. That's the attitude we got to have, man. That's the standards we need to raise. And I feel like what you've said there is right in terms of the difficulty of how Manchester City are this juggernaut that we've got to try and bring down to our level somehow. Where I disagree is that we're now ahead of ourselves because we should be getting into the Champions League. That's basically, in my eyes, looking at us then and thinking, well, we should be where Villa and Spurs are then, fighting with them now. Like, for me, no. I think our squad's much better. I think we're in a better position. I wouldn't look at them two clubs and go, yeah, they're about where Arsenal are. Arsenal are now massively overachieving because they should be fourth or fifth like Villa and Spurs are. So that's the only thing I would disagree with what you'd said in statement, Harry. But to be honest with you, mate, I mean, look, there's a lot of times I've had no faith in what was happening. I never saw us going into a title race last year. Yeah, I thought we were going to be going for top four. When we put ourselves into a title race, I was massively impressed. Where I felt where was a downfall was, we've got to try and overcome this, is we have little clusters of results and we always go back to that cluster and think that was why we didn't get top four, because we lost to Southampton, Brighton and Palace. That was why we didn't win the title, because we couldn't beat West Ham and Liverpool after 2-0 up, and then we drew to Southampton. Oh, and then we lost to Brighton and Forest, one after the other. And again, this season, if we don't win it, we'll look to West Ham, we'll look to Fulham. We lost to Liverpool on top of that as well, went out the FA Cup. We'll always look at those little clusters, and that's something we've got to try and iron out, man, because that is going to let you down. You can't have these clusters of results. You've got to lose one and bounce back. And Arteta and Arsenal have struggled to do that in the last few years. So that's the only real thing I can say. And that's really looking at what would have then been a perfect season. And that might not have been enough. This is what we're coming up against. We're in that situation with Man City where they are faultless, mate.
I agree with you that there are games that we'll look back on if we don't win it this season and we'll say, that was disappointing. The Fulham, the West Ham one, the Villa at home. I agree with all of that. But this thing about the clusters, I don't think it really matters. I think you've got to look at if you look at the run we've then gone on since the turn of the year, I don't think that you can really sort of dive in on the fact that it's clusters too much, because if you had lost one, won your next 6 and then lost one again, people would say, well, look at Arsenal, they're bouncing back, but it would be the same amount of defeats, the same number of points, and therefore probably have the same outcome. What do you make of that, Sophie?
Well, they're not really doing that, though, Harry. That's what I'm getting at. That's what they're not doing. They're not bouncing back. That's why we were, those examples I've given have had 3 years now. Top 4 was a disaster. It's pretty much ours. And then we had that 3 cluster of results last year. Everyone said 8 points clear. Oh, look at these nice fixtures after Anfield. They got West Ham and Southampton. Cluster of bad results. We could have still won the league, and we lost to Brighton and Nottingham Forest. We only lost it by 6. So if you beat both of those you expected to, you got a great chance winning the league. And this Aston Villa game is another one. I know it wasn't a cluster, but that was a kind of, I still think, and I'll say that, sorry, I know you've come to Sophie, but I still think there is development needed in terms of our mentality at Arsenal. I understand what Sophie's saying, that it's got better, but I still think it needs to get better than that, because at every hurdle we've had this season, there has been a slip up. When Aston Villa was massive away, we lost. When Newcastle was massive away, we lost. We couldn't get the job done at the Etihad or Anfield. Not that it's easy, but again, massive tests. And then I think you go to the Bayern Munich situation, the pressure on Aston Villa. There still is something mentally that Arsenal can iron out. And I think that comes down to age and inexperience at times. But that is what I would say about this team right now, what I'd be looking at for next season, for sure.
But the mentality has improved. Because if you look at the results, and Tom fired off how many points we got off City, last season, the Liverpool mental block, those are improvements this season. I think where we do need to improve is, and also, can I just say the Bayern Munich thing? I mean, everyone just got that so wrong. To expect us to beat Bayern Munich over 2 legs in the Champions League when they have all the pedigree and heritage in that competition, and we just don't. We don't have the pedigree or heritage in Europe, let alone in the Champions League. And those are the moments of mental improvement that we need, but that only comes with experience and overcoming adversity. So you can see that the experience of losing out on the Champions League 2 seasons ago, losing out on the Premier League last year, we've overcome those bumps to get 4 points against City, to get 4 points against Liverpool, to not lose out to a top 6 team. I think where we become a little complacent and maybe there's a level of arrogance to us is expecting to go into the Villa game and win, expecting to go into the Fulham game. That run in December, I agree, like London derbies, we were superior last season. And to lose back-to-back against Fulham and West Ham in the manner in which we did as well was shocking. But the mental bounce back from that has been absolutely astonishing. 14 in 16. I mean, it's quite an unbelievable run. So there are incremental improvements mentally. And I think that's undeniable when you look at kind of how, we've played this season. And to still be there One of the things I didn't want is what happened last year. Please don't capitulate. Please don't let this go 5-6 games and we're out of it. We are taking them all the way to the very end. And our goal difference, by the way, talk about an improvement again, season on season, to have that in our back pocket, should there be a miracle result, against one of the teams playing Manchester City, that could prove to be absolutely massive. So for me, I think those things are a strength versus a weakness.
The thing I always struggle with the sort of mentality talk is, how do you quantify how good someone's mentality is? Like, you're literally basing it on, did they bounce back after a defeat or whatever? But you actually can't really measure that. You can't really get inside someone's head and say that the mentality is wrong or that it's not there. And I'm at the point where I believe that they're elite athletes. They're performing really, really well consistently over the last couple of seasons now. I think the manager puts out all the right noises, all the right sounds. And so I give them the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the mentality, because I don't think you can actually quantify like how good that is other than by making a guess based on results and performances and stuff like that. So like, if you say, for example, we're weak in a certain position on the pitch, you can watch that with your eyes and you can say, yeah, we're not as good there as we are in other places. And that shows up. But mentality thing, I think, is quite difficult to measure. I'll bring you in, Tom, and we're going to take a short pause in a minute, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the results against the big six sides this season have been good, barring Villa, who you look at as a big six side of this season, because obviously they're fourth in the table. I think you're right in saying mentality is a really difficult thing to quantify. I think Dan's got a valid point in saying that, there's specific, sometimes there are clusters of games where sometimes we struggle to bounce back. But I think there are equally a number of examples where we do bounce back. The Villa game, for instance, bounce straight back from that. Going out in the Champions League to Bayern Munich, we won the game straight after that. We bounced back really well from that point, and not let that necessarily affect us. So, yeah, I think that, I guess the Aston Villa game was a bit of a cluster, Dan, because obviously Bayern Munich was next to that. So you could argue that it was a little bit of a back-to-back there. It hopefully will improve next season. I think that, the cup games are a big thing for Dan. I think that rightfully, they're things that I want to see improved. I look at obviously who we got knocked out against in the FA Cup, for instance, against Liverpool and Man City as something of a caveat. The League Cup games against Brighton and West Ham, we've rotated. The League Cup is right at the start of the season as well. So there's an argument that obviously where we're still gelling some new players in, we've rotated quite heavily. We're not quick in those matches and there's some heavy rotation. So we don't, whereas next season in the summer, I want this summer to be a representation of the most improvement we make to a squad, so that players like Eddie Nketiah aren't coming into a team, with respect. Players like Reece Nelson aren't coming into a team. Instead, we're rotating with players that are arguably as good as those or as close as they can be to players that are starting. And I'm hoping that this summer represents a significant investment again that puts us to that position, and then naturally would improve maybe the mentality and that ability to bounce back from games and to compete across multiple fronts more effectively. So yeah, I think there's arguments on both sides, but ultimately I think Arsenal are moving in a really positive direction, and we've got a lot of potential, and this summer is a very exciting one to look forward to.
Harry, can I just add 30 seconds real quick?
Of course.
Mentality, if you can't see how that was measured in the Bayern Munich game, I don't know what game you're watching, because that was pure mental. Mental also is focus, right? And the mistakes we made at home were mental mistakes. That was massive. And the other thing too, in regards to winning and winning a bidding culture, one thing Dan and I have always agreed on is we can't toss away the domestic trophies. If you want to win, if you want to build a winning culture, rebuild that part of Arsenal, it starts with a domestic trophy sometimes. Let these players who haven't won together get a taste of what it's like to win and to lift a trophy, because that also can help in a run into a title race as well. So I think that's an area where Mikel Arteta needs to improve, because I think it will help the team overall.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. Obviously, I'd love to see Arsenal lift some kind of trophy to kind of give them the lift off that they need, because we won that FA Cup under Mikel Arteta with a completely different group of players before he'd really got his kind of claws into the project and started ripping it all up and starting again. It was a kind of let's patch this team together for this competition and see what we can do. And we came out on top in the end. I agree with a lot of that. Like, I do think against Bayern Munich, see, I looked at the Bayern Munich games and I looked at the Villa game, and I thought it was down to fatigue. I thought that was the thing that jumped out at me in those games, because I felt like in the first half against Villa, we were very, very good. In the second half, our level went off a cliff. And I felt like that in the second leg against Bayern Munich as well, away from home. First half, I thought we kept them relatively quiet considering where we were. Didn't create much ourselves, but we stayed really focused. And we switched off once in the second half, essentially. And we got done and we got dumped out. And that's the harsh reality of the Champions League and the level that you need to be at there. But all great points. We're going to take a really, really short pause. And then when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about David Raya. We're going to touch on Kai Havertz. And I want to get your thoughts on a rumor that is doing the rounds today. So we've got quite a bit more to pack in. We're going to take a short pause. We'll be back in just a sec.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe.
If that doesn't make you like and subscribe, then I don't know what will.
Hey, my father, like son, man. What a legend.
The heir apparent. I love it.
Oh, that's your son? I thought you just paid some kid to do some.
That's not allowed, Tom. I do want to get you guys' thoughts on David Raya, because I asked Mikel Arteta this question after the game the other day, and in true Mikel Arteta fashion, he kind of grinned as if to say one thing, but then said something completely different. So I asked him if he thought that David Raya winning the Golden Glove, and I'll come to you first on this one, Dan, was justification of a signing that he received a lot of criticism for. We were all, look, myself included, we were all sitting there going, I don't know if this is the right thing. You're unsettling the group. You're unsettling the squad. And at the beginning, I have to say, I wasn't convinced by David Raya. I'm still not totally convinced by David Raya. I've got to say that. But I do look at his skill set now and think maybe it's just slightly better suited to what we want to do as an overall defensive unit. The coming and catching crosses in particular, I think, is the big thing. But has the Golden Glove Award, in your opinion, Dan, justified Arteta's decision to say, I'm changing my number one, even though it wasn't met with a lot of sort of warmth from a lot of Arsenal fans?
I think it's helped, that's for sure. But I also think that you can't look at the goalkeeper and say he's the reason why he's got the Golden Glove. I think what's in front of him has got a massive part to play as to why he's managed to pick that award up. Is he a better goalkeeper than Ramsdale? Maybe just. Is he a huge upgrade? No, absolutely not. I don't look at him and go, wow, thank God we got him. Imagine if we had Aaron back in goal. Nah, not at all, man. I like Aaron Ramsdale. I think Raya's better. I think he's better at the attributes of his feet. I think he's a little bit more commanding. But I think we can do better than him. And it's mad for me to think that we need another goalkeeper now. We're going to need another goalkeeper in the summer because I believe Aaron Ramsdale will leave. But where do we go with this? Do we make him our number one and bring in a backup, which I'm sure we'll touch on in a minute? Or do we go and get a number one and say to Raya, you're going to be our number two now? And that's a real tricky situation because I believe Mikel Arteta sees David Raya as number one. Do the fan base? Maybe. I'm not so sure that I do. And I just don't look at... We've got to look at Alisson and Ederson levels. And I don't think there's many goalkeepers around that are that level, right? But I think there's some that are better. There's in between of Raya and that level. And I'm liking what I'm seeing from some of the goalkeepers out there, like Michael Mannion and Diogo Costa and some of the other goalkeepers that are being rumoured to be in and around people's mindsets for the summer. I like what Raya's done, but I just can't get some of his mistakes out of my head. I really can't. And that fills me with a little bit of anxiety, if I'm honest, every time. I mean, even at the weekend, he did his best to muck up the Tottenham North London derby for us. And he could have done the same thing at the weekend to put a load of nervous for us in the last 20 minutes. I don't know why he doesn't just come and catch that. How he's been fouled there, I still can't work out where the foul is, by the way. I don't know what has happened with Solanke there. So he does fill me with a little nervousness. I don't dislike him. I think he's a good goalkeeper. I do think we could massively upgrade on that position. And call me crazy, but the best goalkeeper that Mikel Arteta had in his reign is now playing at Aston Villa, in my opinion.
Sophie?
Football's mad, isn't it? We're mad. Honestly, sometimes I think, listen, I think it's on record that I wasn't particularly happy about what happened with Ramsdale, and it's less about the quality of David Raya and more about the manner in which it happened. And
And
that's,
that's fair. That's a completely different thing, I think. I think
yeah. I never once said that he's not a better goalkeeper, but I did, and I was very vocal about the manner in which it happened, right? That's history now. It's a good job that I'm not manager of Arsenal Football Club, because how can you not say that the decision hasn't been fruitful for the team? I totally agree with Dan that maybe it's a little inflated because of the talent in front of him. That defense is unbelievable. It's undeniable. You know, Tom read out the stats earlier, but you also have to perform. And as edgy as he has been in moments, he had his Southampton moment against Tottenham. It was a moment of madness. It's unforgivable, and it could have cost us big time, but it didn't, right? I look at seminal moment for him was the Porto Champions League penalty shootout. That for me was the moment where Arsenal fans, some, fell in love with David Raya. And he needed a moment like that. Because one of the things I found it hard with him is I couldn't connect with him. He's much more mature than Aaron. He doesn't have the same outgoing personality. He's a little bit more introverted, and that's all good. But I'm a fan. I want to connect with my team. And I felt that, Aaron came at a time where Benjamin White arrived, Tommy Yasu, prior to that, Kieran Tierney, players who made us fall in love with our club again. And because Aaron was such a massive part of that and he was a big character, I think that played into it. But in terms of talent and on the pitch, I do think that Arteta made the right decision. And also I say to myself, okay, fans who want Arteta out, who are you going to bring in? Unless you can bring in Pep or Jurgen Klopp. What manager are you going to go get right now that will bring in and close other than Ancelotti, right? Proven closers, proven winners. And it's the same thing with David Raya. If you want to find a number one, who are you going to bring in? He's just won the Golden Glove. Unless you can bring me Alisson, I'd be happy to stick with David Raya. And I would also prefer that Ramsdale stuck around too, because you never know what happens in football. I know we can't. I know fiscally we got to sell him to help us strengthen in other areas, but you're still going to have to bring in another goalkeeper. It's the same thing with Thomas Partey. I know he's a big earner. Only is a year. I know he's injury prone. Show me a midfielder that has Thomas Partey's talent that you can bring to the table. So with those kind of thoughts, I find it hard sometimes to just say, yes, let's get rid, because sometimes you can't improve. Zinchenko, yeah, you probably can improve. You got someone in the waiting, but those kind of positions, I'm not sure about in terms of improving. If you can improve, if they go.
I agree with that. Tom, where are you on David Raya? Are you convinced by him? Is he Arsenal's number one for the next few years, in your opinion?
I don't think he's done enough to suggest that people can't have doubts, about his position and where he's at. I think I did a phone-in show a few weeks ago where I did a little bit of a kind of self-reflection, and I was like, I don't think David Raya is irreplaceable at all. I think that if anything, I'm kind of glad that it's just a loan in some ways, and that we can actually make a decision on this, and that we've not committed to this in some ways, which I think is quite telling. The fact that I've got those doubts in me. But I think Sophie raises a really good point. Like, it is a case of who. Dan raised a couple of really good options in Mike Maignan and Diogo Costa. I thought Costa was fabulous against us in the 2 legs over the Champions League games. And he is very highly rated. But there is no guarantee that he doesn't have the same wobbles, the same moments, or Mike Maignan if he comes to Arsenal. It's also worth pointing out when Ederson and Alisson arrived at Liverpool and Manchester City respectively, they weren't of the level that they are today. They were probably around similar levels and similar appreciation to Raya, actually, and had to develop and establish themselves and gain notoriety, and they made big mistakes. Alisson certainly did. I know Ederson did with some of his strange passing antics as well, but now is known to be the best distributor of a ball as a goalkeeper in the world. So it might be that if Raya arrives next season, we're having very different conversations about him, but that'll be on him to do that. From a journalist standpoint, the club have always been very dismissive of the idea that it's definitely going to be made like permanent.
Yeah.
They've always, all the noises I've always had from the club have been, it's a loan right now. But whenever I talk to anyone outside of the club, it's all very much, oh yeah, he's coming. Like it's effectively a done deal. So it's an interesting dynamic. I think he will be made permanent. I think he will arrive as Arsenal's number one, and that obviously then leads into who becomes number 2. But I sense that might be where you want to go next, Harry.
Yeah, I said that I wanted to get you guys' reaction to a rumor that has surfaced over the last 24, 48 hours. Wojciech Szczesny, according to some reports in Italy, I believe, Arsenal are interested in bringing him back to the club as the number 2, obviously. Look, whatever people used to think of Wojciech Szczesny, I always used to look at him and think incredibly talented goalkeeper, but has a mad moment in him and maybe wasn't always mature enough when he needed to be. But he's gone to Italy and he has had an outstanding career there. Dan, would you welcome Wojciech Szczesny back with open arms?
100%, mate. 100%. I think that's a perfect number 2 replacement. I'd much rather go for somebody like that than a Matt Turner or a Matt Ryan or a Runnerson or all these clowns that we signed that were nowhere near good enough, right? Let's
Say
be
how you
real.
really
I
feel, man.
Teeth. You call it a clown?
Yeah, me. It was embarrassing watching them trying to catch balls and stuff. It was just, they were nowhere near good enough. And I understood why people were saying, no, give Turner time, he'll be good. Forest worked out he was no good, so they got rid of him as well. Listen, I think for me, that would be a perfect number 2, Harry, if that's the route we're going to go down. Arteta, I think, will keep Raya as his number 1. I think it would be extremely ruthless, even more ruthless than Aaron Ramsdale now if he's to get the Golden Glove and then go, actually, I want you gone now as well. Even though I would actually quite think that was fair play to him if he did do that, but I don't think he will. I think Szczesny would be a perfect option. 34, I believe, has had a really good career. I always quite liked him, Harry. I can't lie. I did think he was cocky and he got a little bit too above, big for his boots. But you're right in saying that he's done well over in Italy. And I think as well with Szczesny that he's probably the closest to Jens Lehmann that we had in terms of that nutty moment that he had. Now, Jens Lehmann was a better goalkeeper, of course, but when he came in, I couldn't believe he was behind Almunia and Fabianski at one stage. And it was just like, get this guy in. And it was the right call. But listen, I think he would be a really good signing for Arsenal if he was to come back. And I think he'd be interested in coming back as well.
Yeah, I do too. My only reservation would be about Wojciech Szczesny, and I'll bring Sophie and Tom in as well, is ability to play out with his feet. Obviously, a really big deal for Mikel Arteta. I've got question marks about Wojciech Szczesny in that sense. Soph, where are you on the Polish goalkeeper?
I mean, on paper, it makes total sense. And culturally as well, which we know is important to Mikel Arteta. He wants players that fit in character-wise.
Did they play together? Did they play together at Arsenal?
I'm
trying to think. I think so.
So he'd know him, won't he?
Exactly. Knows his personality. He'd bring the shithousery that Ramsdale would leave behind, which I think is important for a goalkeeper. And let's be honest, he's coming in to play in the League Cup and the FA Cup, which he's got experience and he knows. And in those games, sometimes it gets a little bit ugly. Yeah, of course, you need to play out the back and all that jazz. But he'll be coming in as a backup. David Raya will play every single game if he is fit in the Premier League. So, yeah, why not? A player that knows the club, a player that knows how to hand it to Tottenham, even when he's playing for Juventus. What's not to like about this? A mature 34-year-old, was he coming back? I'm all for it.
Tom?
I'm 50-50. The reason why I'm 50-50 is I think that he is and would be a very good number 2. The thing is that the playing out from the back thing is a crux for me. And it's not just playing out from the back, it's also his presence in the box. Because one thing that Raya guarantees you is his presence. His collection of crosses, how he deals with that is second to none. Like I think he ranks as the best goalkeeper in terms of stopped crosses at 12.7%, something like that. The next highest is single digits. That's how good he is in terms of that area. And Arsenal do face a fair amount of crosses, as a team when they're under the cosh sometimes at the end of games when we're, a goal up or, we're facing a counter attack. So, and the thing with Szczesny is that, not even Szczesny, is that I look at Man City and I think one of the best pieces of business that Manchester City have ever done is sign Stefan Ortega, because what a second goalkeeper they've got in that guy.
Unreal.
And he is like, he was unknown. I didn't have a clue who this guy was. I think he came in from, was it Bielefeld in Germany? No one knew who this guy is. And that's kind of where I'm a little bit more of the whole, I don't know goalkeepers that well. Give me an outfield talent, I'll analyse them. Give me a forward, I'll tell you all about them, and I'll go and watch them for a spell. But goalkeepers is not my bag. And I just think that it's the hardest position in the team, arguably, to fill, backup goalkeeper, because there's such a weird dynamic with it. You're not playing too many games. you've got to want to be in that position. And usually it comes down to two levels. Either you're a young guy coming through, or you're an older guy that's happy to be at a big club toward the end of your career. So you're never going to find you're never really going to find a unicorn quite like Stefan Ortega. And I think the thing with Ortega is they spotted a goalkeeper that turned out. I think they got lucky. I don't necessarily think it's great scouting. I think there's an element of that, but I do think they mainly got really lucky with Stefan Ortega, and that he's turned out to be this good. So in terms of options, szczesny is probably one of the best of the bunch that we could get as a backup. And if he came in, I'm not going to have too many qualms about it, especially because he's
like
playing
to
those
look
numbers.
around.
Yeah, I think it's worth having a look just to see if there's some goalkeepers out there with traits. And I'm sure the club are doing that. Their recruitment's been very good. I say that. Second backup goalkeepers, maybe not so much, but but recruitment's mainly been very good.
We are fast running out of time. I've just put a link in the chat to Dan's show, which is starting at 7. Dan told me how to do some kind of redirecting, but it's not letting me find your channel when I'm trying to search it.
No worries, man.
Got no idea why, but I've put the link in there. So you can go over there at 7 p.m. and join Dan. Couple of quick questions I just want to kind of shoehorn in. We'll do them kind of quick fire so that we can make sure that we get through them. First of all, Sophie, I'll come to you first on this one. Has Kai Havertz's performances in the second half of this season at centre forward, have they been enough for the club to pivot or maybe change their approach at a centre forward maybe in the summer? Do you think that he's done enough to kind of make Arsenal reconsider whether going big on a centre forward is the right thing to do?
I think yes, but I also think that if you're looking at catching Manchester City, then we need to invest in a striker. Because you need that's my 10-second answer. I love what he's done, but if we want to crank it up another level, we need a striker.
Tom, you're whispering there, but we could all hear what you wanted to say.
I've changed my view on the summer. I said before that there wasn't a Declan Rice type signing that we could get this summer. There is, and his name is Alexander Isak, and we need to go and spend 100 million on him.
Facts, bro. Facts. I totally agree. That's the one I want. I don't think he's going to go, but that's the one I want.
No.
26.
The whole
he's missed
PSR
how many
thing,
games? He's missed
a
so
lot.
many games.
He's got 20 Premier League goals in 27 Premier League games. So that's stunning. Like
it's crazy.
Yeah.
He's so good, man.
And while we've got Havertz, maybe we can afford to have a player that plays 27 out of 38 Premier League games.
Yeah, it's a good point. We all read a report earlier. Well, I was going to say earlier this week. It was last week now. It feels like Sunday today. It's just all amalgamated into one day. But we all read a report from Gunner Blog about Gabriel Jesus' future. Now, I know Mikel Arteta came out and said, look, he's not going anywhere. We haven't got any intentions of selling him, but we didn't expect him to say anything different. I just wanted to gauge from you guys, what would be the price point at which you would consider selling Gabriel Jesus? Because although I think he's important to the squad, and I think he's been a big part of Arsenal jumping forward in terms of their growth as a team in quite a short space of time, I do think there is a price that I would deal at. Partly because I don't think he's clinical enough, but partly because I'm concerned about some of his ongoing fitness issues. What is that price point for you? I'll start with you, Dan. What's the amount of money that would bring you to the table?
Signed him for, I think, 50, was it? Injury prone, 27, not clinical enough. 40 million? 45 million?
Yeah, same. 40 million. I think I'd take. I think if Nketiah is going for 25, 30, Jesus has to get 40, surely.
So
why this whole thing as well, like him being a striker and stuff like that? Why not you keep him and use him as Saka's backup?
That's what I would do. So
you're going to go back into the market and look for what we need. We need to be really kind of clever with our money.
There's not many better. To be fair,
no, and I don't want him to be like this prolific goal scorer. He's just not. But my God, he's brilliant in that.
I'd love him to be a prolific goal scorer. So.
But he's never been that player, and we've been expecting him to be this guy, and he's not. His strengths are elsewhere, and I just think we keep him and play him in that position.
We keep him 100% as a squad player. There's no point. We got to get rid of Eddie, not Jesus.
Yeah, I would keep him as well, because I also don't think there are many clubs in the world right now that will come in with those kind of 40, 50 million pound offers, because he's kind of done the Premier League cycle, hasn't he? Manchester City, Arsenal. You can't see Liverpool signing him. You can't see Chelsea or Man United signing him. You think about the salary that he's on as well, which would obviously impact clubs' ability to bring him in. I just think you keep him, you use him as a backup player, you use him as a winger, and you rotate him around with that front line. And I think because he was so important in elevating our level last season, we almost owe it to him to give him another season. And even if we do that, he'd still have 2 years on his contract. So you could still sell him at that point. But somebody said to me the other day, Juventus will snap him up. Juventus are going to come in and say, here's a 2-year loan deal with an option to buy him for 30 million pounds. That's the kind of deal
special.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you'd get from them. So based on all of that, I think I'd just keep a hold of him. Guys, thank you so much for joining me. Really, really appreciate it. We had to squeeze those last couple of questions in, but it's always good chat, which is why we always run over the sections. But all the guys' channels are linked in the description of this video and of this podcast. If you're listening to us on the audio platforms, please do go over to them, subscribe. I'm sure you're subscribed anyway, because these guys are all brilliant. But if you haven't, please make sure you do. Tom, thank you. Dan, thank you. I know you guys have got a dash. Sophie, thank you so much. And I will see you all soon. Thank you for tuning in as always. And we'll be back soon with more. Until then, take care.